Dati, ma-justify mo kasi wala tayong bakuna, wala tayong gamot. Meron na tayong tools na na-tame na talaga natin itong COVID kahit ano pa mga variant yan, pero hindi ibig sabihin na hindi tayo mag-iingat.
Another health expert, Dr. Tony Liachon, says with a lower alert level, the government should ramp up healthcare capacity like testing. Today, the country listed over 14,500 new COVID-19 infections. Now, some Metro Manila mayors agree with the move to ease restrictions in the region. Under Alert Level 2, establishments are allowed to operate at up to 70% capacity, depending on whether their operations are indoors or outdoors. But casinos, horse racing, cockfighting, cockpits, lotteries, betting shops, and other gaming establishments remain banned. Valenzuela City Mayor Rex Gatchalian supports the shift, saying this will give the Luyong Mayor Benji Abalos says the decision is based on experts' recommendations. Pasay Mayor Emmy Calixto Rubiano, meanwhile, says the city has an improving COVID-19 situation and the local government continues to ramp up vaccination. Last week, two other mayors, Joy Belmonte of Quezon City and Francis Zamora of San Juan, said they wanted to keep Alert Level 3 in Metro Manila until cases drop further. The controversial no vaccine, no ride policy comes to a halt in Metro Manila beginning tomorrow. Transportation spokesperson Goddess Libiran confirms the lifting or suspension of the policy is automatic under Alert Level 2. A number of groups called for a halt to the policy, calling it discriminatory and illegal. DOTR said it imposed a restriction to prevent a public transport shutdown amid surging COVID-19 cases. Also beginning tomorrow, inbound balikbayans and international travelers are no longer required to undergo quarantine. But Tristan Nodalo reports there are concerns about the relaxed rule.
The government is standing by its decision to scrap the mandatory facility-based quarantine for fully vaccinated returning overseas Filipinos beginning February 1. This would immediately be followed by the entry of fully vaccinated foreign tourists from over 150 visa-free countries on February 10.
Gaya ng mga returning Filipinos no longer required to undergo quarantine. Our confidence to ease travel restrictions comes from various initiatives undertaken over the last 2 years.
Tourism Secretary Berna Romulo Puyat adds that the latest interagency task force decisions were backed by government panel of experts. The Bureau of Quarantine meantime says there are safety measures in place to protect the borders, but the burden now will shift from the agency to local government units.
We still have the safety net of allowing only the fully vaccinated travelers plus the 48 hours RT-PCR negative result tests for them. But now, really, the burden would be with the LGUs. The burden would be on them because of the mandate that this traveler would go straight to their home LGUs.
Health reform advocate Dr. Tony Liachon highlights that the latest protocols may trigger future disaster in the government's COVID-19 response. Liachon indicates some red flags on why it is not yet right to remove border protection measures.
Worry lang natin, wala tayong medical safeguard. While other countries are living with the virus, but they did not actually abandon the basic playbook, which is actually testing, tracing, and isolating quarantine. Without the testings, you will not be able to isolate and contact trace.
He adds that the latest IATF resolutions only legalizes the protocol violations committed by the infamous Poblacion girl. Senator Nancy Binay also criticizes the removal of quarantine requirements for international travelers. The senator adds that without medical safeguards, monitoring, and contact tracing, the abrupt lifting of quarantine measures increases public risks. Tristan Nodalo, CNN Philippines.
Health experts note Johnson & Johnson's Janssen vaccine is also an effective booster shot, even on the highly contagious Omicron variant. A study by the government vaccine expert panel revealed the single-dose vaccine is 85% effective against hospitalization 14 days after getting the shot. Another study also showed the Janssen booster is effective as Pfizer in producing more antibodies in 2 weeks.
There's an early decoupling of data. Ibig sabihin, tumaas man yung Omicron, pero yung kanilang hospitalizations ay bumaba, yung mga severe and critical cases.
It looks like Janssen is doing a pretty good job with its vaccine efficacy against the Omicron variant, especially dun sa Omicron wave. So hindi pa natin nakikita kasi hihimayin mo yun eh. Pag tinignan mo yung vaccine efficacy, mataas pa rin siya for J&J.
Regulators have approved Janssen for use as a booster dose, but the government still not administering the brand due to logistical concerns. Meanwhile, experts say Janssen, AstraZeneca, and Pfizer give higher protection than Sinovac when used as booster for those who receive the China-made vaccine as a primary dose. Now, tomorrow we welcome the Year of the Water Dragon, Chinese New Year, but public festivities in Manila are still cancelled despite the downgrade to alert level 2. Our senior correspondent David Santos visits Chinatown.
Streets are decorated with red lanterns in the world's oldest Chinatown. But for the second straight year, public celebrations for the Chinese New Year are cancelled. Performances that draw big crowds like lion and dragon dances are banned, and so are firecrackers and fireworks display. Sale of liquor is also not allowed.
Pwede pa rin sila makapamasyal sa Binondo. Pwede namang may festivities in their respective homes, no?
The crowd may be relatively smaller here in Binondo compared to previous years, but there's no stopping Filipinos, especially the Filipino-Chinese community, from keeping the traditions of their Chinese ancestors alive. Patrons continue to flock shops selling Lucky Charms along Ongpin Street. Hanging ornaments for doors of homes and businesses still enjoy brisk sales. The cheapest ones, with the tiger accessory, since it's the year of the tiger in Chinese astrology, are sold at 50 to 80 pesos each. These ornaments for prosperity are also being peddled in the streets: ginger, taro, mandarin orange, and pineapple.
Kasi ang pinya, maraming mata, di ba? Parang bantay sa mga monitor niya yung parang CCTV, monitor niya yung mga masasamang espiritu.
To fight off illnesses, there's the golden wulu or holo for good health. Others want charms to counter bad luck. Some seek feng shui tips for an auspicious year.
Kasi pandemic, honestly, our business is kind of affected. So, to get rid of the negative side.
Maganda naman, magaan sa dating ng biyaya.
Wala naman kasi masama kung maniwala ka di ba?
And of course, loads of food from hopia, dumplings, round fruits, and tikoy, which according to this one vendor, sales have yet to pick up.
Kasi kung dati, walang pandemya, mga ganitong araw, humahataw na po kami. Kasi yung mga taga-ibang lugar po, may mga suki kami taga Laguna, Cavite, Batangas, talagang lumuluwas sila, bumibili ng maramihan.
Kailangan ituloy natin siya para at least ma-feel man lang natin na kahit may pandemic, we still have the positivity to continue on with our lives.
But more than the traditions, hard work and discipline and having a strong faith, many believe will bring us through in any adversity. David Santos, CNN Philippines.
World headlines now. 37 more Olympic personnel tested positive for COVID-19 days before the Beijing Winter Games, among them athletes and team officials. The Beijing Organizing Committee says 28 persons tested positive for COVID-19 upon arrival at the airport, while the remaining 9 were already inside the closed-loop system designated for participants and staff. 176 Olympic personnel have caught COVID-19. The Beijing Games will begin on Friday, February 4th. North Korea has fired its longest-range ballistic missile in 5 years. Officials report the Hwasong-12 missile reached a height of 2,000 kilometers and a range of 800 kilometers before falling into the waters of the Korean Peninsula on Sunday. North Korea says the launch was just a test fire to inspect the ground-to-ground missile and check the accuracy of the weapon system. It is Pyongyang's 6th ballistic missile this year and its longest test since 2017. And in the United States, former President Donald Trump hinting at a possible second term. Trump says if he wins in 2024, he would consider pardoning those who were charged in connection with the deadly attack at the U.S. Capitol January 6th last year. He says writers are being treated, quote, so unfairly. The U.S. Justice Department has charged over 700 people linked to the U.S. Capitol riot. Up next on Newsnight, lawyers recommend estafa charges against a number of pharmacy officials that spare some familiar names linked to the controversial deal with a medical supplier. And an update on Rowena Guanzon's public dispute with fellow COMELEC Commissioner Amy Ferolino on the Marcos disqualification case. Keep it here on CNN Philippines. Welcome back to Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines. The House Committee on Good Government and Public Accountability has recommended the filing of syndicated estafa charges against 6 officials of Pharmally Pharmaceutical. This even as the panel found there was no overpricing in the multi-billion peso purchase of COVID-19 supplies. The Pharmally officials recommended to be charged are its president, Wang Tzu-yen, director Lincoln Ong, siblings Mohit and Twinkle Dargani, Justine Garado, and Crizel Grace Mago. The committee says they should be held liable for getting supply contracts even if they were grossly unqualified to do so. The panel also recommended charges of falsification of public documents against George Mendoza and Mervyn Ian Tankitik of the Budget Department's Procurement Service. House Committee Chairman Michael Aglipay said there was not enough evidence to sue former Presidential Economic Advisor Michael Yang to sue or to recommend charges, and ex-DBM Undersecretary Lloyd Christopher Lau both linked to the controversial deal.
Ang sagot ko po dyan sa tanong nyo kay Michael Yang at kay Christopher Lau, insufficiency of evidence. The evidence does not warrant or is not enough for cases to hold.
The House panel also recommended that DBM's procurement service be abolished since all government agencies have their own procurement department. Meantime, Senate Blue Ribbon Committee Chairman Rich Gordon has yet to release a preliminary report on their own investigation. He announced last week that he will present the initial findings today, but it was not on the agenda of the plenary session. No reconciliation in sight between two commissioners in the COMELEC's First Division over the supposedly delayed decision on the Marcos disqualification cases. But Chairman Sharif Abbas sees no need to step in. Melissa Lopez joins us live from COMELEC's headquarters in Manila for updates. Mel?
PR retiring Commissioner Rowena Guanzon today released her separate opinion, which discussed why she voted to disqualify Bongbong Marcos from the presidential race, even though her colleague has yet to draft the official decision. Breaking convention, Guanzon released to media a 24-page document discussing why she thought the former senator should not be allowed to run. While she sided with the Marcos camp in shooting down petitioners to say that Marcos was not sentenced to jail nor deemed perpetually disqualified from holding any government post due to his tax conviction, Guanzon says Marcos's failure to file income tax returns for 4 straight years while he was Ilocos Norte vice governor and eventually governor was a crime of moral turpitude or against good behavior, which is one of the grounds to reject a candidate. Without his ITRs on record, Guanzon says Marcos robbed government with the opportunity to check if he paid the right amount of taxes. Guanzon began the day with a mass joined by a number of supporters clad in purple. But even that did not stop her from targeting decision writer Amy Ferolino again. She says Ferolino is part of a conspiracy to invalidate her vote against Marcos.
Kung ang kabagalan ni Commissioner Ferolino sa pagsusulat ay dahil mabagal po siya magsulat, may problema po siya sa kakayahan niya. Hindi siya dapat ng komisyoner. Kung hindi niya kayang sumulat ng desisyon sa loob ng 7 o 15 días. Kaya sinasabi ko, Commissioner Ferolino, sagutin na natin ang taong bayan. Kung hindi ka nasuhulan, ilabas mo na ang resolusyon bago ako mag-retire.
Guanzon believes Ferolino is deliberately delaying the release of the Marcos decision beyond her retirement on Wednesday, February 2nd. She also calls upon Chairman Sharif Abbas, who is also retiring this week, to intervene. But the chairman is not giving in.
It's a division problem, right? So at this point, there's really no need for this to go outside of the division. The decision of a commissioner is not binding on the decision of anyone else as an individual. Ultimately, ang titingnan natin yung collegial decision, which is embodied in the ponente, no, in the ponensya, in the main decision. So yun talagang hihintayin natin.
Jimenez adds, Guanzon's vote loses relevance in terms of the actual decision on the Marcos cases beyond February 2nd. Meanwhile, in the latest development, Ferolino responded with her own memorandum addressed to Guanzon this afternoon. She says she has nothing to explain because she insists there is no delay in the release of a decision. She also pleaded for Guanzon to stop her public attacks as she is, quote, destroying the credibility of COMELEC through her allegations. Back to you, Pia.
Talk to us, Mel, about the possible scenarios for Bongbong's candidacy with these unresolved cases as of now.
Yeah, so COMELEC spokesman James Jimenez actually floated 3 scenarios. First, Marcos can continue with his campaign activities anytime that the decision is not final means he will continue to be treated as a candidate. Second, if Bongbong is disqualified anytime until just before the proclamation of winners in the race, his votes will not be counted. Instead, it will be considered stray, although he has this option to nominate a substitute who comes from the same party that can be availed until noon of May 9. And third, if he wins the race, he is proclaimed as president but gets disqualified after, it's already the rule of succession which will apply, which means the vice president will take over. Back to you, Pia.
Melissa Lopez there reporting. The Philippine National Police now validating a threat to assassinate presidential aspirant Bongbong Marcos, which was posted on social media app TikTok. PNP Chief General John R. Carlos says a representative of Marcos is already in touch with them and that they would act based on their validation. Justice Secretary Menardo Guevara had earlier said the National Bureau of Investigation is now probing this supposed assassination plot. Marcos' spokesperson praised the NBI for its swift action on the threat and said the former senator is not scared. Iwa, the Kabataan Party list, which was featured in the TikTok post, denies any involvement. The group, as well as the Akbayan Party list, sees the supposed assassination plot as a ploy to distract the public from the Marcos disqualification cases. Presidential aspirants take a stand on more issues as the elections draw near. Manila Mayor Isko Moreno says he will not allow the International Criminal Court to prosecute President Duterte for alleged abuses under the administration's bloody drug war. Moreno argued the ICC cannot prosecute in a country where there is a working justice system. Senator Manny Pacquiao clarifies his earlier statement that cited laziness as the reason why he was the top absentee at the House of Representatives during his term there. Pacquiao, who represented the Lone District of Sarangani from 2010 to 2016, says he only got lazy when there was nothing to do in Congress. He notes he was better off using his time to oversee the construction of homes for the poor. Senator Ping Lacson says there will be no crony capitalism if he is elected president. He vowed to stop the culture of giving undue advantage to political or business associates who helped finance the bid of aspirants. Former Senator Bongbong Marcos says he will neither be for or against the U.S. or China if elected president. He also noted the need to appoint a foreign affairs chief who is well-versed in diplomatic affairs, as the Philippines walks a fine line between the two powers. Marcos notes the country has special ties with the United States that will endure, quote, all through our lifetime, while Manila, he says, has a good relationship with Beijing. Labor leader Carl Yordi de Guzman protested with farmers outside the Senate against a regional trade deal which the chamber could ratify soon. De Guzman says removing taxes on imported products would put the agriculture sector at a disadvantage. And Vice President Leni Robredo wants to amend the Public Service Act to do away with congressional franchises for telecommunication companies. She says this is the #1 hindrance for telcos planning to invest in the country. Still ahead on Newsnight, the national football team makes the country proud after earning the Philippines' first ticket to the FIFA Women's World Cup. And from the latest horror and action films, we look at which blockbusters remain at the top of the U.S. box office. Stay tuned to CNN Philippines. Welcome back to CNN Philippines. I'm Pia Ontiveros. An eventful weekend in sports with the national women's football team making history, or rather her story. For the first time ever, the Philippines is heading to the FIFA Women's World Cup after beating Chinese Taipei on penalties in the AFC Women's Asian Cup quarterfinals. The team will face South Korea in the semifinals on Thursday. Players Cam Rodriguez and Ina Palacios told CNN Philippines Sports Desk how it feels to compete for the World Cup soon, and if they think a podium finish is likely.
Last night, medyo parang it just felt like a game, but waking up today and knowing that we're in the World Cup, no words for it. It's every footballer's dream. Our biggest asset as a team is our defense, and we'll work through that, and I know everyone will be disciplined. In the next, I will claim it, 2 games that we'll have, it's possible. We can, and we probably will, and I won't be surprised if we do, because of the heart that we have, the passion that we have.
The Australian Open finals yesterday also seeing a record-breaking milestone. Tennis superstar Rafael Nadal, now the sole record holder for the most career men's singles Grand Slam titles. This is Nadal's 21st major championship, breaking a tie for the most all-time with his rivals Roger Federer and Novak Djokovic. The Spanish athlete won the title after a grueling 5-set battle with Daniil Medvedev. And the U.S. box office, meanwhile, had a quiet weekend with January coming to a close. And as it turns out, it was another easy top spot on the charts for this superhero film. CNN's David Daniel reports.
$1.8 million kept The King's Man in 5th place. Redeeming Love managed to stay in 4th, earning $1.9 million. Sing 2 is up to $104.8 million. Scream settled for 2nd place, scaring up $7.4 million. Spider-Man: No Way Home. The blockbuster made another $11 million for a domestic total of $736 million, closing in on Avatar for 3rd place on the all-time chart. In Hollywood, I'm David Daniel.
And that's it for now. Join me again on News.ph at 7 p.m. I'm Pia Ontiveros for Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines.
Diabetes is a growing problem here at home, with almost 4 million Filipinos living with the disease. But awareness and better management of its complications can help them live healthier as well as happier. One of the complications is diabetic retinopathy. It happens when high blood sugar levels lead to damage in the eyes, and it typically causes mild vision problems at first, but it could eventually lead to blindness if not managed properly. On the program today, we'll talk more about diabetic retinopathy, its symptoms, types, prevention, as well as treatment. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and welcome to MedTalk Health Talk on CNN Philippines. One in 3 people living with diabetes have some degree of diabetic retinopathy, and every other diabetic and even pre-diabetics are at risk of developing this. Taking active steps to manage it as early as now can help prevent complications and improve your overall health. So let's welcome our guests for today. With us is Dr. Ricardo Papa. He's an ophthalmologist and the Vice President of the Vitreoretina Society of the Philippines. We're also joined by Dr. Lizette Lopez, who's an internal medicine specialist from the UST Hospital. I'll start the discussion with Dr. Rob. Let's talk about what happens when someone has diabetic retinopathy.
People with diabetic retinopathy, there hardly are any symptoms. So that is actually the dangerous part, because the patients, they think everything's going fine. And then later on, when they start to develop the complications of diabetic retinopathy, that's when they start coming in. And by that time, sometimes it's very difficult to reverse the changes that have happened. So that's why our advocacy is to screen early, to catch it early, and to treat it early, and prevent the complications of diabetic retinopathy.
Dr. Lizette, how does someone develop diabetes? Let's explain that to our viewers.
Diabetes, it's a complicated disease in a way. So what happens is there's two insults. Generally, there's a genetic component, but not always required. And then we have the lifestyle part, which a lot of people are familiar with, wherein if we have the poor diet in terms of higher sugar intake, yung mahilig sa chocolates, ice cream, and all of that, as well as the carbs. So in Asia, especially in the Philippines, we like our carbohydrates. We have it in our drinks, we have it in our rice, we have it in our everything, in the food and the desserts and everything else. That is a big factor as to why there is a high prevalence of diabetes in our country.
Dr. Rob mentioned that during the initial phases, the symptoms are very mild or hardly any symptoms at all. But are there any red flags, Dr. Rob, that our viewers, especially our viewers with diabetes, should watch out for?
They can have perfect vision, but there are changes already happening. So if you do get symptoms, these symptoms can be very mild. You can have blurring of vision, slight waviness of vision. You can have floaters. Floaters are these black spots floating in the field of vision. So any small changes like that, but they are non-specific, meaning these changes or these symptoms aren't specific to diabetic retinopathy. They can indicate any sort of retina condition in the eye. So when they see those, they should immediately go to their ophthalmologist.
Dr. Rob, what other factors aside from having diabetes can contribute to having a more severe form of diabetic retinopathy?
When we have diabetic patients, we always tell them, or I always tell them, you have to go to your cardiologist or endocrinologist. You have to manage, aside from your diabetes, aside from managing the blood sugar, you have to manage your blood pressure, you have to manage your cholesterol levels, because it's been proven that if these are elevated, the progression of retinopathy will also be faster.
Now, Dr. Lizette, we have generally two types of diabetes, either type 1 or type 2. Now, for diabetic retinopathy, are both of these, either type 1 or type 2, people at risk of developing diabetic retinopathy?
It has to do with the pathophysiology or the cause of the diabetic retinopathy is because of the high sugar. So whether they have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, then they can have diabetic retinopathy. For type 1 patients, we generally tell them to get the screening or to get their eyes checked with the ophthalmologist 5 years after the initial diagnosis of type 1 diabetes, because it presents immediately. So people would go to the hospital once they have the symptoms, and that's soon after the disease starts. For type 2 diabetes, because generally people may have it for a while, for years, without really feeling it or without knowing that they have diabetes. So the moment it's diagnosed, we tell them to get screened for diabetic retinopathy already.
The longer a person has diabetes, the more likely they'll develop diabetic retinopathy. Dr. Rob, there are actually two types of diabetic retinopathy. Could you explain this to our viewers?
There is the non-proliferative type, which is the earlier type of diabetic retinopathy, meaning a lot of times these patients will not have any symptoms at all. And then there is the more serious type, which is the proliferative type of diabetic retinopathy. And this is the type wherein the patient will start to develop new vessels and is at risk for developing hemorrhage. So meaning there will be blurring of vision, sometimes blinding vision, and a lot of times these patients will sometimes need surgery for management later on.
How can someone prevent this? Because that's what we want to achieve here. We don't want it to reach the severe type or even the proliferative type. So what's your advice to our viewers?
Screening is the most important thing. A number of times I do get patients who have been diabetic for a long time and they don't know that they have to have their eyes checked. We do get a lot of those patients who already have the complications of diabetic retinopathy, and they haven't had any eye exam at all. So aside from the screening, they do need to control those risk factors like your blood sugar, the blood pressure, and cholesterol, as mentioned earlier.
Now, if proliferative diabetic retinopathy is left untreated, it can lead to serious complications. And we'll talk about what these are when we return. Stay with us on MedTalk Health Talk, your partner in healthcare. This is CNN Philippines. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and welcome back to MedTalk Health Talk. When you're living with diabetes, complications may develop over time. For one, diabetic retinopathy is a potentially blinding eye complication, and early detection, as in most diseases, is key. Now, Dr. Liz, going back to diabetes, aside from this diabetic retinopathy, which of course we want to prevent, there are other complications in other parts of the body which diabetes can actually do. What are some of the more severe cases if diabetes is left untreated?
So we have the complications for the microvascular disease, and that's the eye, so the retinopathy, which we're talking about now. We also have, which most people are familiar with, for the nephropathy, or those who will require eventually dialysis if it's not treated. So the kidneys are affected. And then we have the nerves, and that's actually very common as well. A lot of our patients say tusok or some numbness or thickening of their hands and feet, and that's the neuropathy. What most people are not aware of is that even the nerves for the internal organs are affected. So there's the problems with the heart, wherein the blood pressure may fluctuate. There's also problems with constipation, with prolonged food in the stomach. For the more severe complications, we have the amputation because of problems in the big vessels going towards the feet. And therefore, there's also the problem with poor wound healing. And then, of course, we have the strokes and the heart attacks, because there are problems already with the blood vessels in the heart or the blood vessels going towards the brain.
Going back to Dr. Rob. Dr. Rob, so it can be hand in hand. Someone with diabetes can not only have diabetic retinopathy, but other factors in their body as well. But focusing on the extreme side of diabetic retinopathy, you talked about some hemorrhages. What will the patient feel kapag malala na yung kanyang diabetic retinopathy?
The main thing is really blurring of vision. So you can get macular edema, and then you can also get vitreous hemorrhage and something known as tractional retinal detachment. So a lot of the symptoms there are basically blurring of vision. If you get blood in your vitreous area, so the vitreous is this gel which is normally clear, and when that fills up with blood, it will cover your view. So the doctor cannot see inside to check the retina. The patient can't see out of his eye to see anything else.
Dr. Rob, many people might be asking, if they reach this point and they do lose their vision because of those factors, which one here are reversible and which ones are permanent?
Both are reversible. So when you have macular edema, there are various treatments that we can give. You can give injections of a medication. You can give laser. For vitreous hemorrhage, you can do surgery if it's not clearing after a certain period of time. When you talk about being reversible, sometimes if the macular edema is there for such a long period of time, it's very difficult to reverse. And that's what I was referring to earlier when I said that prevention is always better than cure, because when you get these changes, it's very hard to reverse the changes. So we can clear the blood, but if there's damage that happens to the macular area, it's very hard to bring the patient back to his normal 20/20 vision. So again, if you're watching, please get yourself screened if you haven't already.
Dr. Rob, I'd like to also talk about a very common eye condition that a lot of our viewers know about, and that is glaucoma. Could you talk about the link between glaucoma and diabetic retinopathy?
So glaucoma is a condition wherein the optic nerve of the eye is affected. It's caused by a series of changes in the eye, and most common of which is the rise in intraocular pressure. So the eye has a certain pressure level, and if it rises beyond the normal levels, the optic nerve becomes choked, blood cannot flow very well to the optic nerve, and eventually it dies. So the link between diabetes and glaucoma, it's usually the end stage. So when you have a lot of proliferation of these new vessels, they will block the angles in the eye.
Dr. Liz, I'd like to go back to diabetes ulit para doon sa mga hindi aware, because it's very easy to not know na diabetic ka na pala or pre-diabetic ang isang tao. What's the best test for someone to undertake to know their glucose status?
It should be, the screening is for the fasting blood sugar, so that's an 8-hour fast with no fluids and nothing, no food, of course. And then also an HbA1c, although we have to make sure it's a good quality HbA1c because there are a lot of laboratories which may not have the best quality HbA1c.
Okay.
The fasting blood sugar for normal is less than 100. For 100 to 125 is the impaired fasting glucose or yung papuntang diabetes. And then 126 and above is diabetes. And for the HbA1c, it is less than 5.7% for normal. And then pre-diabetes is 5.7 to 6.4%. Above 6.5% and above is diabetes.
Dr. Rob, let's talk about screening now for diabetic retinopathy. Explain to our viewers what this entails. A lot of our viewers would like to know, is this painful? Is this tolerable? Tell them how it goes.
When you have an appointment with your ophthalmologist, they will do the basic examination. They'll take they'll check your vision, check your refraction, check the pressure of the eye. And one of the final examinations that they do is they dilate the pupil. So the pupil is this black hole in the middle of your iris. So normally it's small, it's about 2 to 3 millimeters. So we will place drops in the eye to dilate it to about 8 to 9 millimeters. And this allows us to see the back part of the eye, which is the retina. So it's not painful, but you will get a lot of glare when you go out. So we tell patients that you will have a hard time reading near objects because you cannot accommodate. And 2, you will have difficulty if there's bright light out. So you will have a lot of glare. So wearing of shades will help out. But definitely it's not painful.
When it comes to these screening tests, where should our viewers go for the most accurate results?
Any ophthalmologist should be able to do that. If you tell them that you are a diabetic and you want to have your retina checked, or even if you just tell them that you're a diabetic, most of them should know enough to do a retina exam. So some of these major hospitals, they will take a photo of your retina, and this, once it gets read, it will indicate there if you do have changes from diabetes or not.
Apart from regular screening, managing diabetes is an effective way to prevent diabetic retinopathy. We'll talk about the best practices when we return. We want to be your partner for a lifetime of good health, so stay with us here on CNN Philippines. One of the more common complications of diabetes is diabetic retinopathy. Today, we're talking about how to avoid, manage, and treat this condition. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and this is MedTalk Health Talk, where your health always comes first. Sometimes diabetic retinopathy can't be prevented. Symptoms often don't appear until the condition progresses. And we mentioned that regular screening is key in preventing severe vision loss. But a healthy lifestyle needs to come hand in hand. Dr. Liz, can you share with our viewers some of the best practices in managing someone's blood glucose and trying to keep it in that very healthy range?
Always the diet and the exercise still, so aside from the medications. Actually, I tell patients the most important part of the management is diet. So if they don't eat properly, then what happens is the medications will either not work very well or you just keep going up on them and then they end up on insulin. So the diet part is so generally that eat more vegetables first, non-starchy vegetables, right? So the more of the leafy ones and yung mga ampalaya and things like that for half of the plate. And then 1/4 of the plate is the just the carbohydrates, and that includes the starchy vegetables. And then we have the proteins at 1/4 of the plate. And the drinks, that's what we should really tell patients, like avoid all sugary drinks as much as possible. Then we have the exercise or the lifestyle part. And the general rule is, so moderate intensity exercise, it used to be 150 minutes per week. So that's around 2.5 hours a week, split up like every 2 to 3 days. However, what happens is that these days, because of the pandemic and people aren't able to go out, the guidelines have increased to 200 minutes of moderate intensity exercise. High intensity exercise is 75 minutes per week, and that's if they can't even talk, or they can barely talk, or just in phrases. So they really should have that sort of activity.
Now, Dr. Rob, I'd like to go to treatment when it comes to diabetic retinopathy. Let's start first with the non-proliferative type. What is the general treatment for this?
So for non-proliferative, it's basically observation. We tell the patient, the most important thing you can do is go regularly to your endocrinologist, because we need you to control all those risk factors, the blood sugar, the blood pressure, the cholesterol. And they usually just follow up with us once a year if there are none, or there's no retinopathy, or if there's mild retinopathy. If the retinopathy is around moderate, then maybe we see them every 5 to 6 months. So if they're